Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, and we are in we're now officially in the dog days of the offseason. I know the Buffalo Bills just wrapped up rookie camp, and they have like OTAs and mandatory OTAs before we really get into the doldrums of the offseason. But I think I saw today Peter Schrager of NFL Network was ranking his top 5 most clutch quarterbacks. So it's officially that time of year, Dave. So kudos to Chris 716 for coming in with the positivity early. He says, go Bills. We appreciate that. Go Bills. And wasn't planning on talking the schedule tonight, but we've already got 2 comments about the schedule. So we'll hit the schedule real quick before we get started today. Philip 8980 comes in and says, this schedule is worse than last year. 6 8 o'clock or later start games, 4 4:25 games in a row, 4 1 p.m. Eastern time games, and the London debacle. How do they make us play at Philly, going to buy and play at Kansas City? I'll tell you what a long way we have come as Bills fans from we didn't even get one primetime game to we have too many primetime games coming from some people. I know looking at the schedule, Dave, and I'm just going to ask you for your quick thoughts. I mean, I'm not complaining. My biggest complaint is like London, Giants at home, then a Thursday game. Like that's my biggest complaint. But literally the whole schedule is pretty much home, away, home, away, home, away, bye really late in the season so we can recharge. So to me personally, all the primetime games that are thrown in there, all the different home and away, home and away, home and away, not having to go long stretches on the road, I'm fine with it. Like I don't really have too much of an issue with the schedule. How about yourself?
No, I'm generally okay with it. I prefer a later bye. The last couple years before this feels like the Bills have had fairly early buys, like week 8, week 7-ish range. I do feel like the schedule has sort of set itself up, at least on paper, somewhat opposite of last year. You know, we talked at length last year about like the early stages of the 2022 schedule being difficult, and if the Bills could navigate through that, we really thought that second half of the schedule opened up. Whereas I feel like this schedule, it's a little bit the opposite of 2022. You know, we talk about not having a ton of those 1 p.m. games. Most of those are early in the season. I think 4 of the first 5 games are at or 4 of the first 6, are 1 p.m. And then there's only like one other one after that, which is like right now the last game of the or second to last game of the year. So it's kind of the opposite feel for me. Like I feel like this season the Bills really need to get out of the gates fast. I feel like early in the season, and then really the schedule, to me at least. I mean, you can talk about strength of schedule not meaning much now, but like whatever you want to say, like playing at Philly, playing at Kansas City, going to the Chargers, playing the Pats and Dolphins the last 2 weeks. Like I don't care really what the strength of schedule says. Like those games are going to be hard. And I'm not taking for granted that Jets game that comes up before that Philly game before the bye. So I think for me, I have no complaints about like the times or like when the bye is. I don't really have any complaints about, you can't really complain about opponents because your opponents are already determined. So overall, like not a lot of complaints from me, I would say.
To me, like the one gripe, like I mentioned, that I had on the schedule is London, Giants, Bucks Thursday night. And the reason for that is like you have that long trip to London, then you got to come right back home. You got to play the Giants, who are a tough team, and then you got to go boom on Sunday night, and then you got to get ready for that Thursday night game. And anything can happen on a bye week. Do I have that right on the schedule too? Do you have the schedule pull up in front of you? I'm sort of doing this off my head. I do have that right. Yeah, like anything can happen on a short week, and I just don't like playing bad teams on short weeks.
No.
Oh, I do have it mistaken.
So they're the Giants, and then there's a Sunday game against the Pats. Then it's Thursday, Tampa.
Okay. Excuse me. Sorry, I wasn't looking directly at the schedule. But either way, like my point is I don't like playing bad teams on Thursday Night Football because I feel like anything can happen on those short weeks. So to me, I like playing like bad teams on those. I like playing more competitive games on those Thursday nights because I feel like it puts both good teams at a disadvantage. So that's just about the only issue I have. Jessica Tennis comes in with a really interesting comment. And this is something that I've been sort of trying to look into. She says, does anyone know which games CBS decided to keep this year? They kept the Bills versus Kansas City last year, thinking they might have done the same this year. Both Sunday and Monday night are flexed this year. The AFC and the NFC no longer belong to ABC, or excuse me, to CBS or Fox.
Mhm.
Essentially, what the NFL head of scheduling said is every single game, every single week is a free agent. That's sort of how he termed it. So I'm not sure what power CBS and Fox have to protect those 425 window games anymore, because I think the NFL wants to give prime time, Sunday night, Monday night, more oomph. So it'll be interesting to see if they're still allowed to protect those games. They haven't really made it clear whether CBS or Fox gets those type of protections anymore that they used to get in the future. So that'll be something really interesting to sort of dive into. But on top of the schedule, we also had the Buffalo Bills conduct their rookie mini camp. They had a ton of different players in on a tryout basis, a really interesting array of names.
Mhm.
Marvin Wilson really stuck out to me, a guy that we had a huge draft crush on a few years ago. Bills didn't end up signing him. Maybe they circle back by training camp. They're pretty loaded at defensive tackle, at least on the depth chart in terms of the sheer volume of names. But the Buffalo Bills did make 3 signings coming out of rookie camp. Shane Ray, the former first-round pick who's been in the CFL the last couple of years. He got out to a pretty decent start, 8 sacks in his second season with the Broncos after being a first-round pick out of Missouri. Then a wrist injury really sort of tapered his career off before he wound up in the CFL. Traven Howard, who started for the Rams on their Super Bowl team, had a game-sealing interception as a linebacker in the NFC Championship game just 2 seasons ago. Another guy who's dealt with some injuries, was sort of out of football last season. And then the big power back out of UCF, Isaiah Bowser, who just adds to the sort of UDFA list the Buffalo Bills have created for themselves. So what are your thoughts on the rookie minicamp signings?
Shane Ray's interesting to me. Like you guys know who watch the show, and obviously my best friend, he's a Broncos fan. We talk a lot of Broncos, talk a lot of Bills. Shane Ray, that draft, obviously, there was talks of him being even a higher pick than that, and there were some off the field concerns, I think, with drugs that kind of slipped him down to the tail end of that first round. But really, the question for him wasn't about talent, and really those off field things really became no concern once he got into the league. It's really been about injuries with him. You mentioned the wrist injury, but he's battled through a number of injuries, multiple injuries through his career. 3 or 4 fairly major injuries that he's had has really kind of taken his career on an interesting path. So to me, this signing to me is like screams of low risk, and I don't want to say high reward, but maybe low risk impact reward, if you want to like some kind of thing where like this guy could have an impact on this team. He is more of that sort of, speed rusher type of player that is more akin to a Von Miller, and he's more of an in-between Von Miller and like the other guys we have. He's kind of an in-between. And so like, I feel like there could be a path for him to make the roster if Von's not ready for the start of the season. Now it's still a long shot, but the guy does have talent. And if he's injury free, I expect him to make a decent impression in training camp. So the question will be has he been too far removed from the NFL? He didn't necessarily have eye-popping numbers in the CFL, but stayed a little bit healthier, I guess, in the CFL than he did in the NFL. But look, low risk, high reward signing. Bowser's an interesting one. We didn't talk a ton about him in the pre-draft process, but an interesting name to add to the room. I personally like Mims, the other running back we signed as well.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. And then like, it's funny, like I think what it really highlights to me is like, you can find guys who have good experience in the NFL in meaningful games at all junctures of the offseason. And Brandon Beane has done that. I mean, Shane Ray won a Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos, had a few good plays in that game against the Panthers. You mentioned Howard having that play in the NFC Championship game. So, not these illustrious careers, but in some big moments, these guys have showed up throughout different spots in their career in meaningful NFL games. So,
yeah.
I like it.
Jessica Tennis comes in and says, screams of Von Miller telling the Bills Ray can help us. Yeah, listen, Shane Ray, like I said, he's looking for a career resurgence. I think that there is something to say about Von Miller, who was his sort of mentor in Denver. Buffalo ended up being the place where he got the tryout. It was probably Von Miller who greased the wheels, got him the tryout. He got the tryout. He impressed and was able to sign that contract to come to training camp. And when you have Von Miller, who could possibly be missing some time, there is possibly some competition there, especially if he shows he can have a little bit of pass rush pop and he can be sort of that fifth defensive end until Von Miller gets back competing with guys like Kingsley Jonathan. But I was getting ready to do a social media post and I was going to drop it. I was going to drop it today and I was gonna be like, all right, Buffalo Bills, let's kick a couple cans down the road, like extend some people, restructure some people, free up a little money, go chase Justin Houston or Yannick to add to the defensive line rotation, go add Quan Alexander to the linebacking core. Like I literally had that tweet saved in the drafts, ready to go for whenever I felt like it was a good time to send it. And then literally about 20 minutes after I drafted that tweet, news came down that the Buffalo Bills were signing Travin Howard. And then 15 minutes later, news came down the Buffalo Bills were signing Shane Ray. So it looks like Brandon Beane just isn't willing to maybe kick some of those cans down the road. He's made that commentary before this offseason. He does not want to end up like the Los Angeles Rams. So instead of a Justin Houston or a Yannick Ngakoue, we get a, maybe Shane Ray can turn into something type of guy. Maybe like this gives the Buffalo Bills some bodies to go into camp. And if Justin Houston or Yannick Ngakoue are still sitting there, maybe their price comes down later and Shane Ray does not preclude you from chasing them at a later date. And maybe Quan Alexander just wasn't maybe the fit that the Buffalo Bills were looking for. Again, Travin Howard, he's a safety convert, much like Dorian Williams, much like Terrell Bernard, much like Balon Spector. We're having the same exact conversation about Travin Howard that we're having about those guys. It's like, man, the Bills just really have not filled this traditional Mike role. On this defense, it's really just AJ Klein and Tyrell Dodson. So it'll be really interesting to see once we hit the preseason and then more notably once we hit the regular season, how it is exactly Sean McDermott is switching up this defense to cater to the new personnel in that linebacking core. And that's why I'm glad we have the New York Jets week 1, because the New York Jets aren't going to really know what hit them unless they decide to go back to 2015 and watch Sean McDermott Carolina tape. I don't think the New York Jets are exactly going to know what to expect from the Buffalo Bills week 1.
The New York Jets aren't going to know what to expect. And I mean, yes, we'll pay attention to training camp, but we might not know exactly what to expect week 1, which I think actually that part of the schedule, I'm kind of glad that we play the Jets week 1. I think that's 100%. An advantage for the Bills for sure. Even though the game's on the road, I still think that's an advantage for the Bills to have that game early, potentially. I don't want to say steal a game, but a game where the Jets are a team that you could foresee getting better potentially as the season goes on, figuring things out. So catching them early maybe is a good thing. We'll see.
Yeah, Bills got 88 roster spots filled up. They could obviously sign 90 if they'd like to. Brandon Beane has made some commentary earlier this offseason. They might not go all the way to 90 because of cap purposes, because they have to offer some of these guys guaranteed money, and that still counts against the salary cap when you release them, etc. I think that's why Tyrell Shavers got a 3-year deal, so they could stretch out the guarantees they had to give him to get him here. So people who might want to read into him getting a 3-year deal, I think that definitely means the Bills like him, but I also think that means the Buffalo Bills wanted to be able to stretch out his guaranteed money once they release him at the end of August. I'm looking at the depth chart, and really, to me, the shortest position right now, or the shallowest position, however you want to phrase it, we have Dalton Kincaid, we have Dawson Knox, we have Quentin Morris, we have Zach Davidson. I think the Bills might want to add another tight end before we get to training camp, right? Like maybe another more traditional Knox-like tight end, more so than the Kincaid or Quentin Morris sort of flex out type.
Yeah, you would think they would bring in some kind of maybe even more towards the blocking type of tight end to kind of balance out the room, at least for training camp. You probably want to have, 5-6 usable guys there for camp. I think that you mentioned they have 5 right now, I believe, or is it only 4?
It is currently 4.
Before, yeah.
Knox,
so
Kincaid, Morris, and Davidson.
So I think having 5 makes sense for camp, maybe even 6, but probably won't go that high. So I feel like, look, he's not coming back, obviously, Tommy Sweeney, but like a Lee Smith type guy, a guy that's going to be there for blocking, could be a guy that they bring in for camp. Knox is your all-around guy. Kincaid, Morris, more of the receiving types. And so it would be nice to balance out the room a bit. It is a shallow position. And if the Bills making this investment in Kincaid, thinking they might be using 2 tight ends more on the field with that 12 personnel, then they're going to need more bodies in camp for practice to rotate through. So
Charles G coming in saying, damn, we cutting Shavers already. No, I just saw a couple people asking about that 3-year deal, and I've just been sort of mulling on it and thinking about it and why the Buffalo Bills could have given him a 3-year deal. And the conclusion I came to was I think that they want to be able to stretch those guarantees out over multiple years, because I think they liked him enough that they had to maybe offer him a little bit more money to incentivize him to come here. But listen, Tyrell Shavers has a chance to make this roster. He has a chance to beat out Justin Shorter for that last wide receiver gig. There's a chance the Buffalo Bills could keep 7 wide receivers, but there's a reason why Justin Shorter was a 5th round pick of the Buffalo Bills and Tyrell Shavers was a undrafted free agent. The Bills clearly like Justin Shorter more, so there is I think a better chance for Justin Shorter to make this football team. We had this commentary after the draft. It really does seem like Brandon Beane was like cognizant or aware of whether these guys could play special teams or not, or whether these guys could make the 53-man roster or not when he was drafting later on in the draft, because we've had so many players poached over the years. Yep. So that doesn't mean Tyrell Shavers doesn't have a future on this football team. I'd be willing to bank some money that like he has a pretty good chance to make the roster in 2024, because I think he'd be a guy that they would immediately throw on the practice squad because of his upside as a gunner and his size as a wide receiver as well.
Well, yeah, and we know Merck has been very vocal about him being potentially the best gunner in the entire country coming out. So, look, there could be a situation a year or 2 from now where Saran Neal isn't here anymore, guys like that, and Shavers kind of carves out that role. Richard Greenwood says Gilliam ?
Yeah, I was just going to pivot next to. We were talking about tight ends, maybe with Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, and all of this 12 personnel. Maybe that means less 21 personnel. So Reggie Gilliam goes into more of a traditional tight end role or starts to get more traditional tight end looks. That's where I was going to maybe go with that commentary. So maybe he is the extra tight end and we don't need another one.
Could be.
Speaking of all these UDFAs, I'm going to put you on the spot here real quick. Of all the undrafted free agents that the Buffalo Bills have accumulated over the past week or so, which one do you think has the best chance to make the 53-man roster? I know this wasn't in our notes, so I'm putting you on the spot here.
Just the signings from the last week? Or all the
any UDFA on the team? Yeah.
Ooh, man, that's tough. I'll go with Jordan Mims. I'll throw Jordan Mims. Look, I think any UDFA is going to have a very, very big uphill climb. Shavers might be in the conversation as well. I just like Mims. I think that if the Bills really felt like he brought something to the table that they could see a future in him and maybe he can be a contributor on special teams. Latavius Murray, obviously they brought in late in the game free agency. They signed Damon Harris to a 1-year deal. They didn't draft any running backs, obviously, and they still have obviously Naheem Hines, who maybe becomes more of a specialty. Like, I don't know. I don't think I think there's probably like a less than 10% chance that any of these UDFAs make the team, but it would probably be Mims or Shavers. I would say would be have the best chance.
Yeah, I mean, Claude Puig comes in and says DJ Dale. I think that would have been a good one until Poona Ford signed. Now I think DJ Dale could be an interesting name. Again, an interesting name in 2024, but I don't know so much about 2023. John Herring says got to be Shavers. And again, I'm just going to go back to this, right? We have Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Khalil Shakir, Deontay Hardy, Justin Shorter, Trent Sherfield. That's 6, right? Again, if Shavers really impresses, it doesn't preclude you from cutting your 5th-round pick Justin Shorter or your 5th-round pick last year in Khalil Shakir, and it doesn't preclude you from moving on from Trent Sherfield. But I just really do not think a team in the championship window is going to do that. So I think that a 7th wide receiver is a possibility, and that would be Shavers. But again, now you're kicking Trent Sherfield, who's already a proven gunner in the National Football League. You're going to kick him to You're going to kick him to the inactive list. Are you going to inactive Khalil Shakir? Are you going to inactive Justin Shorter on game day? I just think so many guys have a leg up. I think Shavers, that 3-year deal, I think the Bills like him. I think the Bills want to put him on the practice squad. They want to stash him for when a guy like Trent Sherfield's contract is up a year from now. But I just don't know if his chances this year. So I'm going to go with the guy that John Osborne threw out here, not Isaiah Bowser. But I'm going to go with Richard Garage from University of Florida. A guy
I like that.
The Buffalo Bills, and it has to do with numbers, right? Like, what's his competition? His competition is David Quessenberry, Tommy Doyle, Ryan Vandermark, and the other UDFA that they signed, Noah Henderson, out of East Carolina. So to me, there's not a lot of competition there. He could come in. This is a guy who started games in the SEC, both at left guard and left tackle. I know he'll probably be maybe moving over to the right side, but he's a guy who could come in, and if he impresses, right, I think he could steal Tommy Doyle's spot, or he could steal David Quessenberry's spot. Like, if he really shows up and shows out in training camp, just from the sheer numbers, the numbers game, I think Garage has the best chance of possibly making the team. James Bain comes in the super chat. Always appreciate you. James, he says, thoughts on Chad Kelly in the Buffalo Bills quarterback room. I know he came off the bench last year to help the Argos win the Grey Cup, I believe.
Yeah.
So if I have that correct, so that'll be interesting. I don't think that that's in the realm of possibility. I know the Buffalo Bills had Jalen McClendon and they had Quinn Dormady in for their tryouts, both XFL QBs who flashed some upside. But to my knowledge, they both did not look so great at rookie camp. So I don't think either of those two are getting contracts from the Buffalo Bills. I know there was the picture going around that I retweeted of Dawson Knox and Tyrell Dodson, of all people, and James Patterson, the rookie minicamp middle linebacker of the Buffalo Bulls, formerly the Buffalo Bulls, were all in San Antonio taking selfies with Jordan Teamu, the quarterback of the DC Defenders, who's now a free agent after he lost in that title game. But I think at the end of the day, you saw that the three Buffalo Bills quarterbacks that are going to be at training camp hitting dingers at the Rogers Center in Toronto this afternoon. I think it's going to be Josh Allen, Kyle Allen on the active roster, and it looks like Matt Barkley will be the practice squad quarterback. And that's an interesting conversation to have, and I'll kick it to you in a moment, because yeah, it's fun and exciting in the preseason to have maybe more of a live arm than Matt Barkley, like a younger guy, a developmental guy. But there is upside to having just Matt Barkley as your third string quarterback.
Well, I think the upside is the reps that you're going to get in camp to some of these receivers that the Bills have invested in, right? Like Justin Shorter, even guys like Khalil Shakir are probably going to be at some point during camp catching passes from Barkley and from Kyle Allen. Like, I feel like quality repetitions, even if it's maybe not necessarily the flashy type of plays or like the downfield plays, like that type of stuff can go a long way for these young guys, right? And making sure that they have a guy that they can rely on to put the ball on the spot, even if it's not getting zipped in there like 100 miles an hour, like we know Josh Allen can. These guys just having a reliable guy feeding them the football, and especially when it comes time for the preseason, which we would imagine Matt Barkley's going to get a ton of time to play in the preseason. Kyle Allen probably get a good amount of time as well, but it's an evaluation point, right, for the Bills, and with one less preseason game, every rep really matters for these younger wide receivers. I think if you had 4 preseason games, like maybe it's a slightly different conversation, but now with preseason only being 3 games and these guys fighting for roster spots, especially in a situation where you may only keep 6, and you probably will only keep 6 wide receivers, like I think it makes the most sense from a valuation standpoint to have Matt Barkley there.
Especially with the rule change this year too. Like, you can carry 90 guys all the way up to the final cut down. So there's not that cut down to 75 this year, which I think is really good for the Bills, because you don't need to risk any players in the third preseason game if you don't want to. And you can have Matt Barkley just throwing to all of these sort of receivers and getting your final look at all of these whether it's Tyrell Shavers or whether it's Justin Shorter, or whether it's Khalil Shakir, any of these guys towards the back half of the depth chart can get a decent amount of reps in the preseason. But before we move on to our topic for today, which we're 25 minutes in, we haven't even gotten to yet. We're going to break down the Chiefs and the Bengals, and we're going to see how the Buffalo Bills stack up to both of these teams. Their top competition in the AFC for a trip to the Super Bowl this year. That just shows how much Bills Mafia. We're 110 deep, and we're still talking UDFAs and the quarterback depth chart here on the Air Raid Hour. But Matt Barkley, 5 home runs today. Josh Allen, 4. Are we concerned that maybe Josh Allen isn't taking this offseason serious?
You know, this. I mean, I'm sure Nick Wright's going to talk about it.
Someone should DM Nick Wright this statistic just to see if he will throw it into his show.
I mean, you got to start questioning that commitment there. Someone's going to take me out of context there and be like, "We're
gonna clip this. We're gonna clip this." Don't you worry.
That is a little surprising, though. I mean, Barkley, maybe the mechanics.
That's a dad bod 5 home runs right there. I think he's rocking it. But all right, so let's now get into sort of the conversation that we want to have tonight, and that is, how did the Buffalo Bills stack up against the 2 teams that have stood in their way for a Super Bowl title the last 3 seasons? The Kansas City Chiefs, last year's champions, and the Cincinnati Bengals, the runner-ups 2 seasons ago, the team that knocked us out of the playoffs last season. Let's start with the draft classes of each of these teams, and then we're going to go sort of position group by position group, and we're going to see how the Buffalo Bills stack up to all these teams. But just a quick overview right now of the draft classes. Let's start with the Chiefs. In the first round, they went with the local guy, Kansas State pass rusher Felix Anudike-Uzomah, a guy who was your guy as an edge rusher in our pre-draft show, a guy that both of us like, gave us some Jerry Hughes vibes. In the second round, they took Rashee Rice, who's a guy that we loved during the season, but as the pre-draft process sort of went along, both of us sort of soured on. But then they took some guys that we liked. In the third round, they added Wanya Morris. In the fourth round, they added Shamari Connor. Fifth round, edge rusher BJ Thompson. Sixth round, I think they stole Keandre Coburn, the nose tackle out of Texas. And then the seventh round, they took nickel corner Nick Jones. The Chiefs draft class, what are your thoughts on it as a whole, and whether these rookies can contribute like last year's rookies?
I hate it because it's good. Look, I mean, a lot of guys on this list that we spent a lot of time discussing on the pre-draft process for the Bills, and especially guys like Wanya Morris, who was on my no matter what list. And I know Keandre Coburn, who Kevin Masseri really liked as a interior defensive tackle, even over guys like Broderick Martin and others. Like, we talked about Rashee Rice going into the Senior Bowl, really just didn't do a ton there, but we still liked some of the promise there. And then Felix Anudike-Uzomah, like, strong, not the lengthiest guy, but strong pass rusher, played maybe out of position as well, similar to a Will McDonald at Iowa State. Felix playing a little bit out of position, I think, as well in Kansas State on that 3. I think they have 3-3-5 or some interesting alignment, but he was really a 3. He was on a 3-man line playing the edge for a guy who really probably should be where he is now in a traditional 4-3 edge rushing type of position. And so I look at this class for the Chiefs, and then we didn't even talk about Shamari Connor, who we also liked. I think it's top to bottom a really solid class. I think that they're adding Rashee Rice to the receiving room is a bit of a wild card, because it's like they kind of have a hodgepodge group of wide receivers right now. Like, they're going to have lean more on Kadarius Toney this year. We know Juju's not there anymore. Mecole Hardman's not there anymore. They still have Valdez Scantling. We know Sky Moore is potentially going to maybe take a step up this year. So it's a very interesting guy to add to the room. Not a ton of pressure on him, but opportunity for him. So I'd like that for Rashee Rice, being in a situation where he's going to have opportunity, but really not a ton of pressure, and going into a great situation. So, and then Coburn, right? Like, that guy's going to soak up everything from Chris Jones, and adding depth behind Chris Jones as well. So look, I'm talking very highly about this class for the Chiefs because I feel like they had a really good draft, and it pains me to say that, but yeah, I know, Claude, that you know what it was too, was one pick later after we picked
Dorian
after we
Williams.
picked Dorian
Yeah.
Williams. Wanya went one pick
And,
later. So we'll see how that one
yeah.
plays out. It stings for
and
sure.
and it and it's a nice draft too, because like Uzama is a guy who you added Charles Omenihu in free agency to bolster your pass rush. You have George Karlaftis, so this is a pretty good like yin to the power yang that is Omenihu and Karlaftis. Those guys are more like brute strength guys, and now you have Uzama, who is a little bit more of a bender, a little bit more of a speed guy off the edge. He gives you a trio of pass rushers, and there's not too much pressure on him early on. He can just pin his ears back and he can go after the quarterback. So I think that was a good pickup for them. Rashee Rice, like my biggest question mark on him was like, can he separate in the NFL? Can he, do the things he needs to do? And he ends up on an offense with a guy who can just scheme him open. Doesn't really have to really concern himself too much about separating in his own on his own merit. So while he's sort of developing that aspect of his game, he has the best offensive mind in football to just scheme him open. They got a depth piece along the offensive line who could play tackle or guard in Wanya Morris. And then I think Shamari Conyer could earn himself, onto the field relatively early, at least in some sub packages, because, if something happens to one of their safeties or Scott, the guy that we loved last year out of Cincinnati, doesn't develop the way, everyone wants him to develop, I think a guy like Shamari Conyer could go in there and he, maybe he could steal a job from somebody. I really was high on that kid out of Virginia Tech this year. And then Coburn adds to that defensive line rotation as well. And there's some other guys there, but we're not going to get too into the weeds with the draft classes here. We're going to transition now to the Bengals draft class. And looking at the Bengals draft class, this was not what I expected, right? Like I was expecting them to go add a bona fide tight end. Like they are counting this year on Irv Smith, Devin Asiasi, and Drew Sample. And I am shook. I cannot believe that a team that had CJ Uzama, had Hayden Hurst, is now shifting and pivoting to this, because they didn't even draft a tight end in this draft class. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it was a pretty solid draft class. Wasn't very high on Miles Murphy, but he's the type of edge they like. He now gets into a really nice rotation there. DJ Turner is a corner with some upside that could allow them to move Cam Taylor-Britt to some other places in the secondary if he can win a starting job right away. They lost both their starting safeties in the offseason, so Jordan Battle could come in right away as a third rounder, possibly be their starting strong safety. Charlie Jones, I mean, this is a guy who could take the mantle from Tyler Boyd in a couple of years as their slot receiver, and he could be a really, really like game-breaking niche receiver, number 4 on this football team, because he's got that big play ability. Chase Brown could come in, be the new Samaje Perine, and maybe take the load in 2025 as the workhorse back for this football team. Andre Yeshivas is a interesting wide receiver athlete that they can mold. They added a punter and a corner late in Brad Robbins and DJ Ivy. So this is another draft class that I think the Bengals just knocked out of the park.
Bengals got a lot of value out of this draft. And, there were obviously a lot of people wondering like why they didn't take Michael Mayer, like when they could have had him in the first round, and like passing on a tight end when they obviously lost Hayden Hurst in the offseason to Carolina. But look, Hayden Hurst was a really good, solid player for them. Like he was he wasn't a superstar by any means, but he was a pretty good contributor. They have patched together an interesting tight end room with Irv Smith, who they signed obviously from the Vikings, who did, have a lot of promise coming out. Hasn't really necessarily panned out for him, but maybe a change of scenery is going to be good for him. Maybe that's the type of guy that they are looking for. They did invest a second round pick in Drew Sample in 2019. Now he's coming to the end of that. He's going to be coming to the end of that here soon, but I still feel like they maybe like Drew Sample a little bit. And then obviously getting Asiasi from New England from that year, they drafted seemed like 6 tight ends. So like, if you dig into it a little bit deeper, maybe you're like, okay, now maybe I'm not so surprised they didn't take a tight end because they're going to put some faith into Irv Smith. But I really liked the picks of Turner and Battle in the second and third rounds for them, because I thought they needed another outside corner. Awuzie is there, but like they have Cam Taylor-Britt on the other side, hoping obviously he can take another step in his second year. So not a bad investment to make in a corner. And then you mentioned them losing both their safeties in to free agency, and Jordan Battle falling into their laps in the 3rd round, which I thought was really just incredible value. So like I actually kind of liked that the way their draft shook out the long game as far as them like not necessarily taking a tight end early. I think they got a lot of good players, and I think they're going to be just fine with Irv Smith and that maybe that a little bit of a platoon at tight end, because they also kind of reloaded the bottom of that wide receiver depth chart too through the draft. So good draft for the Bengals.
Yeah.
Solid. I mean, solid top to bottom again. So both of these teams, solid drafts.
And that's the reason why they're good. And that's the reason why, this season they're going to continue to be good, and they're going to continue to be the 2 teams that stand in the way of the Buffalo Bills, and whether they're not, they can finally get over the hump and get to the Super Bowl. So we're going to get down in the nitty gritty of both of these rosters, go position group by position group in a moment. But first, this show is sponsored by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right. So there was an interesting conversation going on social media today. And that was sort of, I think it was like the Steve Tasker for the Hall of Fame Twitter handle tweeted out like all of the NFL head coaches in the years it took them to finally like win their first Super Bowl. And the list is just never ending of all these great coaches who took almost a decade or more to even make it to the Super Bowl or to win a Super Bowl. And the point is that like, maybe we're a little too critical. Maybe we're a little too harsh on Sean McDermott, who's heading into his 7th season as the Buffalo Bills head coach, but he's now heading into the 4th year, I think, of this team in a Super Bowl window. Josh Allen is now going into his 4th year of being an elite quarterback in the National Football League, dating back to 2020, sort of the COVID year where there were no fans in the stands for most of the season. That's when our window began, when Josh Allen started to show that he was elite. So really my judgment of Sean McDermott has to be from then on. So he's now 3 seasons without a trip to the Super Bowl, 3 seasons where he's exited the playoffs with losses to the Kansas City Chiefs or the Cincinnati Bengals. How long of a leash do you think Sean McDermott has? Because I think this dude's got a decade. Like, I really do not think his job is remotely hot unless the Buffalo Bills like don't make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, he's the one that you take your dog outside and you don't even put a leash on him. You just let him roam free and you don't worry about it, and he's coming back. And look, jokes aside, like we shouldn't even be talking about leash for Sean McDermott. Like, I know the losses in the playoffs have been frustrating, but you don't kind of get rid of a good thing like this just because. And Josh Allen's pressure is real. I mean, Andy Reid failed in several playoff games, several NFC championship games before he finally got over the hump on a different team. And like, it takes a while. Look how long it took Bill Cowher, right, with the Steelers, like, to finally win that Super Bowl for him. Like, it took him years and years. Like, it takes some of these guys a long time in some cases. And like, in some cases you may get one shot and you may get that shot. Like Sean Payton with the Saints, like, got his shot in that Super Bowl and they beat the Colts. Like, they had Drew Brees for, almost 2 decades there. Like, so much variance in football and so many different things can happen in each season, and the playoffs are just like a wild thing. You have to guarantee, or as close to guarantee, or I'll call it sustainability, and this is like the Brandon Bean thing. You need to put yourself in the playoffs first and foremost every year, or as much as you can every year. If it's not every year, it needs to be almost every year. And like says that's job number 1 for Sean McDermott, and he's done that in 4 of the 5 years that he's been here, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, so that's number 1. When you get to the playoffs, weird things happen. I know it's frustrating, but like, we shouldn't be talking about McDermott. Reed didn't have Allen, neither did Cal. Yeah, I mean, I get that. I'm just saying.
I mean, one had Donovan McNabb, so like, it was still a pretty darn good quarterback. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, the thought has crossed my head the last couple of days because living out here in the desert, I'm a huge Phoenix Suns fan. I made the decision when I moved out here 6 years ago, before they were good, that I was going to switch my allegiance from the Knicks to the Suns, and I did so wholeheartedly. And both of the teams are rather successful now, so it worked out for everybody. But so I've been pretty ingrained in the Phoenix Suns over the past 6 years, and they went to the NBA Finals 2 years ago, lost. Then they've been eliminated from playoffs the last 2 years in embarrassing fashion, much like the Buffalo Bills have been embarrassed the playoffs, but left the playoffs the last 2 years in embarrassing fashion after going to the AFC Championship game. And Monty Williams ended up getting fired. And you see Nick Nurse getting fired from the Raptors, and Mike Budenholzer getting fired, and Doc Rivers is probably going to get fired. But at the end of the day, like, the NBA is not the NFL. Like, it's not 12, 13 guys. It's 53 dudes, and it's just a completely different organizational structure and all of those different things. So in that regard, I really just don't think you're going to upend your entire franchise just because, it's taking him some time to get over that hump. Again, you can come in and you can be hypercritical and say, like, anything short of a championship is unacceptable. Like Josh Allen is the next Elway comes in and says, no more excuses. I'm sick of it, etc. Like, you can have that mindset. That is fine. There are people out there that have that mindset. The NBA is the example I'm pointing to, where you have that mindset. It's like, what have you done for me lately? Like, mid-season, people are getting fired. Like, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty hectic. I just think things are different in the NFL. Like, it is so hard to win the Super Bowl. It is so hard to even get to the Super Bowl. You look at the AFC, and the AFC is just so stinking good. If you were to fire Sean McDermott, right, you'd have to have Andy Reid in place to convince me to fire Sean McDermott. Like, there's just really no one out there that you could really consider upending your franchise for and bringing in to be the head coach of the football team. And this all just sort of, I think we went on a little longer than I thought here, but like, this is all just going to the conversation that we're having tonight of what do we need to do to get over the hump, and taking a look at these rosters and what we need to do and how they stack up compared to how we stack up, because this is the hump that Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills need to get over. And it starts at the quarterback position, really, for all of these franchises. The Buffalo Bills have Josh Allen. The Kansas City Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes. The Cincinnati Bengals have Joe Burrow. This is kind of a hot take here, and I'm going to get some flack from people. If I were to rank them most talented, Josh Allen would be number one. I think Josh Allen's the most talented quarterback in the NFL. Physically gifted, etc., the whole package. But if you were to rank them based on what they've accomplished in the National Football League, I think I would probably rank it Mahomes, Burrow, Allen. And I think that that's fair, because even though Josh Allen walked off the field in Arrowhead 2 years ago with 13 seconds and a lead, Patrick Mahomes has delivered now 2 Super Bowl championships, and Joe Burrow has gotten to that big game. And then he got to the AFC Championship game last year. So I don't think it's unfair for anyone to rank those two above Josh Allen if you're one of those people who want to do that, even though I've been pretty vocal about, like, I think those conversations are just silly. What are your thoughts on that?
I think each of these guys is exactly where they need to be for themselves individually to be their most successful versions of themselves. I think situations matter. I think Patrick Mahomes being in Kansas City with Andy Reid, obviously, is gold, right? 2 championships and, looking for more. Joe Burrow coming in with Zach Taylor, kind of them growing together and kind of taking this Bengals franchise out of, that Marvin Lewis purgatory era, right? With Andy Dalton. And I'm not trying to badmouth Andy Dalton by any means, but like, that Bengals franchise was like it was kind of akin to like a Tyrod Taylor led Bills team, right? You were like, which way are we going here with Andy Dalton? Which way are we going here with Tyrod Taylor? They finally decided to break that, go get Joe Burrow. Zach Taylor comes in, and Joe Burrow is a perfect fit for that franchise. And then the same for Josh, obviously, with the Bills, right? He's perfect. He's a perfect fit for this team, for this city. His style of play endears himself to the fans, and you're right, he probably is the most talented guy. I think we're talking about the 3 best quarterbacks in the NFL when we're talking about these three guys.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, these are the three best quarterbacks in the NFL heading into 2023. I can hear arguments about others. I can hear arguments, maybe people are going to talk about Jalen Hurts and like other people. But like, to me, if you're going to have like a podium, if you will, of quarterbacks in the NFL in 2023 heading into the season, these are the three. So rankings, I'm not really too bent out of shape. Every team, fan of each of these teams probably going to put their guy first, right? Like, but they're the three best in the league, in my opinion. So really all in the fact that they're all in the AFC just makes the road that much more difficult, right? I mean, it's just wild.
We got James coming in with a super chat, so we'll put a little pause in this conversation and we'll come back to it in a moment. But he says McD has to get past his old school ways of not trusting and playing rookies. Look what Reed did with Kansas City and using his rooks to win the Super Bowl. There's multiple ways in which you can look at this. Like, I was frustrated as well, I think, to a degree, because I wanted to see Kyrie Elam play last year, because I've been recently with my newborn child, because I'm a weirdo, rewatching the 2017 Buffalo Bills season. And one of the things that you see in the 2017 Buffalo Bills rewatch is Trey White took his lumps. He got taken to school by AJ Green early on in the season. But as the season progressed, Trey White started to transition and he just looked different out there. And by the end of the season, he was one of the best players on our defense. Matt Milano, it took him a little bit, but he got onto the field and he just looked different than when Ramon Humber was on the field. So there's some truth to what James is saying here. Last year, we were struggling with Khalil Shakir and Khalil Shakir not getting playing time as well when we were seeing guys like Isaiah McKenzie struggle. But on the other hand, the Buffalo Bills did start week 1 with Christian Benford at cornerback. So a rookie did start at corner. So how much is there to really say? And there are some rumblings coming out now that maybe Khalil Shakir was running wrong routes, didn't exactly have a thorough understanding of the playbook, etc. So there was a couple of different varying things that sort of maybe affected Khalil Shakir's playing time. So James, don't think I disagree with you, but I also think that maybe Sean McDermott's lack of playing rookies might be a little blown out of proportion. Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we skew these things. We tend to skew these things because we see a team like Kansas City use their rookies last year at a necessity, really, right? And I mean, yes, they did make an impact, but like, I don't know that a Super Bowl caliber team, unless you're in a situation where you've been gutted or you are forced to out of injury, anticipated that you're going to play that many snaps for rookie. I mean, what was it? The Philadelphia Eagles, I think, were the least amount of snaps for rookies last year, right? And they were in the Super Bowl. So it's like you had the most and you had the least, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I'm just saying, like it's again, it's team specific, it's situation specific. It's like, what do you need? Where do you need to have an impact?
And this also goes back to why Patrick Mahomes is clearly the best quarterback in the National Football League. Last year was supposed to be a reset year for the Kansas City Chiefs. They were playing all those rookies because they were recalibrating their roster. And yet they still made it to the Super Bowl and then won the Super Bowl. So that really just goes to show you the genius that is Andy Reid and the greatness that is Patrick Mahomes. Because listen, like, we're having the same conversation right now, just getting triggered by the national media talking about the Jets and the Dolphins and treating the Bills like the third best team in the AFC East. The Chiefs were getting that treatment last year when you saw JC Jackson and Khalil Mack go to the Chargers, and you saw the Broncos add Russell Wilson, and you saw the Raiders add Devontae Adams. That same conversation was going on last year for Kansas City Chiefs and their fans. I know we got a couple of Chiefs fans in the comment section. They could probably agree. And that just really goes to show the greatness of Patrick Mahomes, because they took all of that and they still ended up winning the Super Bowl. So nothing but respect for what they got going on at quarterback. But let's take a look now at skill position players. And I want to, for the sake of today's show and time, I'm going to combine the running back rooms, the receiver rooms, and the tight end rooms. We're just going to talk about skill position players in general. And I'll say this, and I don't want to sound disrespectful because I know we have Kansas City Chiefs fans in the comment section. Every year I look at the Chiefs, every year since Tyreek Hill left 2 years ago, like last year and this year, I look at their depth chart in terms of their skill position players, and I am just so like underwhelmed at what the Kansas City Chiefs have at their skill positions, but yet they somehow manage to yearly transcend what's on paper because of the greatness of Travis Kelce, because of the greatness of Patrick Mahomes, and because of the greatness of Andy Reid and his play calling ability. I mean, you look at this Kansas City Chiefs team, it's Isaiah Pacheco at running back, and he's dealt with an abundance of injuries from last season that he played through that he's dealing with right now. And then they're just running back Jerick McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You look at their receiving core, they lose Juju Smith-Schuster, they lose Mecole Hardman, and they really only added Rashee Rice. It's Valdez-Scantling, it's Sky Moore, it's Kadarius Toney, it's Rashee Rice, and it's Richie James. And then you look at tight end, and they have some guys who catch passes here and there in Gray and Fortson and Bell, but it's Travis Kelce. They have a couple of guys maybe with some upside. Justin Ross is a name that I know a lot of people in Chiefs Kingdom are excited about. Justin Watson going in his second year in that system. He's an athletic, sort of like their Jake Kumaro type, upside type of depth receiver. But I look at the Chiefs skilled position, and I'll outside of Travis Kelce, it's really not that impressive. But again, this just goes to show how great Andy Reid and co are there in Kansas City. What are your thoughts on the skill position group in Kansas City?
I mean, similar to last year, right? I mean, I do think losing Juju maybe is going to hurt them a bit. Valdez-Scantling, a little bit inconsistent. You know, he is capable of making the big play, of taking the top off the defense, but you wonder about consistency. The fact is they have the best tight end in the NFL, like by a wide margin, probably, right? So there is not maybe a more consistent player in the NFL than Travis Kelce, and maybe, you know, a non-quarterback impactful player than Travis Kelce in the NFL. So they find a way, and you look at what they did last year and giving Isaiah Pacheco that run sort of in the second half of that season, weren't afraid to sit down a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who they invested a first round pick in a couple years back, and say, hey, look, this isn't it for us right now, right? And Jerick McKinnon made a really big impact to that team. So they pieced it together, and they found a way through Mahomes and through Kelce and these other complementary pieces to find a way. Now, I am high on Sky Moore. I think he can be. Yep. I think he can be really good, and I think that Kadarius Toney is also a name that can be like, they have talent in the room, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of like, is that talent going to kind of rise to the surface? You wouldn't bet against it because of the system they're in, and they have maybe more talent in the receiving room this year, but more question marks as far as like, are they going to get the most out of it? So I think last year you probably go in and say like it was maybe a little bit more expected as far as what the room was with Juju and Kelce, Valdez-Scantling. This year is a little bit more of a wild card with guys like Sky Moore in his second year and Kadarius Toney, but there is talent there, so it's not to be taken lightly. And by the way, I like Richie James. I thought he was pretty good with the Giants last year, and like he had some really good games for them, and so I wouldn't count him out as making an impact for them this year either.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sky Moore pops off this year. Like everyone's talking about Kadarius Toney right now. I think Sky Moore is really going under the radar as a guy who could really have himself a year. Me and you both loved Sky Moore last year. He was, one of our dudes in that pre-draft process. So I think he's going under the radar. I think he might have a better year than Kadarius Toney. Like I think Kadarius Toney was pretty much, they were just cost effectively replacing Mecole Hardman. I think he's sort of their, down the field speed guy to take the top off, gadget guy underneath. I think it's Sky Moore who will take on the more of a role as like a legitimate sort of receiver, more so than a gadget weapon. So I think Moore could have a good season, but still, like if somebody like a higher power were to come down right now, say, Steve, you can snap your finger and you can replace the Kansas City Chiefs skill position players with the Buffalo Bills skill position players, I would look that higher power in the eye and I would say, no, thank you. I wouldn't want to do it. I think the Bills, at least on paper, have a better collection of skill position players. If Kelce and Diggs cancel each other out, I think the Bills are more impressive top to bottom. But like you said, the untapped potential of Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney are intriguing.
Yeah, and I think you made the point. It's like, okay, in one hand you have Kelce, and the other you have Diggs. In both situations, again, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs is a match made in heaven, and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce is a match made in heaven. So, right, the Bills may be trying to add that element to their offense this year by going out and getting a guy like Kincaid. I'm not saying he's Travis Kelce, so please don't clip that one either. But something a little different, right? Something a little different than what they've done in the past, and kind of like maybe create some different levels here in this offense. So I'm with you. I think top to bottom, the depth is better for the Bills. I do think the upside of Tony and Moore is probably, I'll say, is a better upside than Sherfield and Shakir. I do think Tony and Moore is a better upside duo, but I also think Gabriel Davis is a much better number 2 than Valdez Scantling, or really number 1, because he is like their number 1. So from that regard, I would say I would give the Bills a slight edge top to bottom, but yeah, that Kelce Diggs conversation is interesting. Different positions, so hard to say.
Looking at the Bengals now, obviously what sort of has really been this bread and butter for the Bengals for years, or not years, but the last couple of seasons has been Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. I mean, that's just an explosive trio of wide receivers. It's the best trio of wide receivers in the National Football League. You add Charlie Jones on top of that as their number 4 receiver. That's impressive. Joe Mixon, I'm surprised they didn't try harder to upgrade behind him this offseason, because I think the wear and tear on Joe Mixon is showing. So I don't think Joe Mixon is as impressive as he used to be. They now have Chase Brown, Trayvon Williams, and Chris Evans behind him. And then again, I'm really shocked, especially with the fact that like T. Higgins could be gone after this year and Tyler Boyd's getting up there. I'm surprised they didn't try to recalibrate their offense a little bit by adding a little bit more something at tight end. They added Irv Smith Jr., who's got a laundry list of injuries and has never met his potential, to go along with Drew Sample and Devin Asiasi. So Chase, Higgins, Boyd are what they are. It's explosive. It's awesome. Joe Mixon is still very good in his own right, but I think there are some question marks surrounding the bottom half of this Bengals skill position assortment. Am I crazy? The running back depth and the tight end depth there, kind of like,
Yeah, the top end of this Bengals offense is really good. I mean, Joe Mixon as a number 1 back, he's really talented. And then the top 3 of Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. I mean, Chase and Higgins are, arguably right up there with Hill and Waddle, right, as the best 1-2. Maybe they are the best 1-2. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, like they could very well be the best 1-2 combo in the NFL at receiver. So the Bengals, with a chance to potentially add to that best 1-2 combo in drafting a rookie tight end, maybe said, you know what, rookie tight ends take a little more time to develop. We're going to put our assets elsewhere. We did sign Irv Smith, and we think that for 2023, this is going to be the best version of our offense. Now, they're not deep, and that is the concern for the Bengals. They're going to need to stay healthy. They did struggle, I wouldn't say a lot, but when Chase missed some of those games last year, I mean, T. Higgins earned that paycheck, right? Like when he had to step in. And so, like, to me, the Bengals, it's about health for them in 2023. I don't think, Charlie Jones is necessarily going to make a huge impact in 2023, but you did draft him as a little bit of depth there. You mentioned Chase Brown in the 5th round. I actually like Chris Evans a bit, but he's also kind of their kick and punt returner, I believe. So, or he does at least contribute a little bit on kick returns. They're probably going to have Charlie Jones do it this year, but very good at the top end, but the depth is really probably as far as depth is concerned across the 3 teams, the Bengals probably have the least, but they might have the best top end talent collectively.
Yes. So as long as they stay healthy, they're the number 1 of that skill position group, just because of the elite top end of that talent. As Walter S comes in and says, like, Gabriel Davis, who's our number 2 receiver, would be the number 4 receiver in Kansas City, and it's not even a question. So looking now at the offensive line, the guys protecting for the quarterbacks, the guys protecting for these skill position players, the Chiefs did a little bit of both of these teams did a little bit of recalibrating to the bookends of their offensive lines. starting with the Chiefs here, Thuney, Humphrey, and Smith working the middle, just like they did last year. It's an elite group. They're spectacular up the middle of that offensive line. Has a lot to do with the fact that they can maybe have some lesser names at the skilled positions. The questions for the bookends this year for Kansas City have been answered as follows. At first, they signed Juwan Taylor. The thought was like, oh, this is the Orlando Brown replacement. They're going to move him to left tackle. No, he's going to be the right tackle, and it's going to be Donovan Smith, who was maybe showing his age in Tampa Bay, manning the left tackle spot for the Kansas City Chiefs, at least to start training camp, per the indications from the team. A lot of people were taken aback by that, thinking Juwan Taylor was going to be the right tackle, or excuse me, the left tackle, and someone else was going to get their shot on the right-hand side. A lot of people question whether this Donovan Smith thing is going to work out for the Chiefs at left tackle. But I will say this, like, I think one of the things that makes Mahomes and Burrow, maybe Josh Allen is more versatile than them in a lot of ways, but maybe one of the ways that they're more versatile than Josh Allen is their ability to like do West Coast stuff and just like hit those quick hitters and get the ball out of their hands quickly. Whereas Josh is a guy who holds onto the ball for a rather lengthy amount of time. So maybe a guy like Donovan Smith in Andy Reid offense, in an offense where Patrick Mahomes has shown he's fully capable of getting the ball out quick. Maybe he can, find the fountain of youth and have a rather productive season at left tackle. And that's scary thinking about Juwan Taylor over there then manning the right side for Kansas City. What are your thoughts on this recalibrated Chiefs offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's quite as good as their offensive line from a year ago, but I still think it's definitely above average, right? I mean, Donovan Smith, I think, is a good fit for them from that perspective because he's certainly known more as a pass blocking. He's certainly known more for his pass blocking than he is in the run game, which should be expected as a left tackle. But 71 grade last year, he was middle of the pack as far as grading is concerned from PFF. 990 snaps last year, 39th rated tackle. I mean, it's okay. I mean, he's a big dude, 6'6", 338. So like you're getting some size there on the left side. I think that knowing you had Juwan Taylor and thinking that, okay, well, if we signed a guy like Donovan Smith, he's probably really only going to be effective on the left side, made that decision for them. I don't think it's a bad situation for them. Like you mentioned, they're really solid up the middle. So that'll help things out as well. But I would say it's a notch below their offensive line from a year ago, but it's still quite good.
Yeah, shifting our attention now over to the Bengals. They added former Chiefs left tackle Orlando Brown Jr. to a big money deal. He's going to man the left-hand side for the Bengals. So they're going to be left to right. Orlando Brown Jr., they're bringing back Cordell Volson from last year, Ted Karras from last year, Alex Kappa from last year. It's a solid 4 guys from left to right. Then sort of the question mark ensues as to who plays right tackle. Is it going to be Lyle Collins going into the second year of that big money deal? He struggled a little bit with speed off the edge. Cody Ford maybe gets a chance, but in all seriousness, I heard they're trying to trade Jonah Williams. So it'll be interesting to see if they can trade Jonah Williams. If they can't, does he get a shot at right tackle? And they also have Jackson Carman sitting there as well, the former second-round pick. So there are some options for the Bengals at right tackle. But what do you think about this reworked unit bringing in Orlando Brown Jr.?
I mean, I think it's a home run for the Bengals. I mean, look, Joe Burrow's first year and even really last year, he got sacked a ton, right? He still gets sacked a ton. That line did get better as the year went on, as they made some investment. You mentioned Kappa, who they brought in from Tampa Bay the year before. And they did try to shore up that interior a bit a year ago. So now bringing Orlando Brown in on the left side, I think the Bengals are finally kind of getting that protection and beefing up that line for Joe Burrow. And I do think Joe Burrow's experience and being behind the line that maybe he hasn't trusted fully going back to his rookie year is gonna work out for him, right? He's been, a guy that's had to get rid of the ball so quickly in his time, and he's gotten sacked so much that like that experience is going to help him now when he has an above average offensive line in front of him. So you see the Bengals trying to make that concerted effort in giving that big money deal to Brown. So I think, there's a question mark on the right side at right tackle, but really that's the only question mark for the Bengals offensive line, which is now all of a sudden, rewind 2 years ago was a pretty putrid unit. Now looks like a pretty solid unit. So kudos to them for beefing that unit up.
Just gotta stay healthy, because if they don't, then they have to play Cody Ford, and they're in trouble. All right, transitioning now to the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about the pass rush. Let's talk about the defensive lines. The Kansas City Chiefs, we'll start with them. They've got some real power players in George Karlaftis, Charles Omenihu, who they signed. I think he was a big free agent signing. He was their big splash. Him and Juwan Taylor were their big splashes this offseason. And they drafted Uzama in the first round. So they got a solid trio of edge rushers there. Karlaftis and Omenihu could even kick inside and 3-tech it along with Chris Jones. And then they got space eaters in Keandre Coburn, Danny Shelton, and Derek Noddy. They're one techs there. And Leo Chanel adds a little bit of pass rush pop as well from the linebacker spot. So the Chiefs got stronger, and they added a little bit of bend in Uzama to their defensive line. It's a solid unit, spearheaded by an elite interior disruptor in Chris Jones.
Yeah, and this is what scares me, right? Because in the past, you would look at this Chiefs defensive line, and they had guys at times like Melvin Ingram and Justin Houston, right? Like not necessarily in their primes, but like you look at it now, and they had Chris Jones in the middle. Obviously, you mentioned they signed Omenihu for one side. They drafted George Karlaftis in the first round last year, right, to be that other edge, and now on top of that, they draft Felix and Aduke Uzama and bring in Keandre Coburn to kind of put there behind Derek Noddy. So it's now all of a sudden a pretty deep group. You mentioned Danny Shelton. They have from the Giants, like a space eater there. It's a deep group, and it's a really good group. And it pains me to say it, but like I think this is maybe like potentially the best defensive line group the Chiefs have had in the last 4 to 5 years heading into a season. I wouldn't be afraid to say that.
The biggest thing I fear is just all the mixing and matching that I think Steve Spagnuolo can do, because I think Karlaftis, Omenihu, those guys can kick inside the 3-tech along with guys like Jones. You can have, Noddy, Shelton, Coburn. You can have those guys space eating. You could even move Chris Jones out to defensive end, which is something that they've done in the past. And that's one of the reasons why, like, number one, we got to cross our fingers and hope Spencer Brown develops, because he's one of our stronger players. And this is a very strong defensive line. And this is another, I mentioned this on a previous show, under review with Joe DeRosa. This is why I'm pumped that we drafted Osiris Torrance, because you look at Karlaftis, you look at Omenihu, you look at Chris Jones. These are legitimate power players. So to have a player with a strong base, a strong anchor in Osiris Torrance, to maybe change a little bit the philosophy of this offensive line. I don't even want to say philosophy, but just the body composition of this offensive line a little bit by adding Osiris Torrance. That inspires me a little bit because of a defensive line like you see here in Kansas City.
It inspires me a little bit, but it also,
it's just one guy
talking about it worries me that the Bills didn't do enough on the edges, right? And so, I mean, great that they shored up the interior as far as McGovern and Torrance, obviously, and they signed Edwards, and like they did a lot to kind of try to shore up that interior, and like that's gonna hopefully pay dividends when it comes to defending guys like Chris Jones, and we're gonna talk about the Bengals here in a second, but I still say advantage Chiefs on that front.
Looking at the Bengals defensive line, the Bengals have two really solid starting edge rushers in Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson being like my spirit animal, one of my favorite players in the National Football League, guy that me and you both wanted the Buffalo Bills to pursue when he was available in free agency a couple of years ago. Cam Sample, Joseph Osai, those were solid rotational edge rushers. Osai's mistake in the playoffs aside. But now they add Miles Murphy to that rotation as well along the edge. On the interior, they got some really good starters in BJ Hill and DJ Reader. Zach Carter coming off the bench in that rotation. He's very good as well. Who knows who that fourth guy in the rotation is going to be for them? Is it going to be J. Tufele? Is it going to be somebody else? But again, this is a solid, this is an above average defensive line unit. And again, one of the reasons why the Bengals are so good the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I was a big DJ Reader guy too when he was available. Obviously, we were never going to get him. BJ Hill and him are a really nice dude. Like that front four, that starting front four, there's not a real weakness there. If you're going to say maybe there's a weakness. It's that like Trey Henderson's not like the purest pass rusher, but he still gets home, right? And like, so the Bengals haven't necessarily been like a huge sack outfit, but they are just so solid like across the entire line.
Mhm.
And they do have a little bit of depth now too that you mentioned. So, Zach Carter, I like him a lot. But it's just another group that kind of makes you excuse me, it makes you worry a little bit that did the Bills do enough? And again, you start seeing the trends with some of these teams and sort of how they're going with their defensive lines. And like the Bills, to their credit, they've taken that approach as well on the defensive line a little bit, especially on the interior. They're bringing in waves of guys like signing Poona Ford, bringing in Shane Ray. Like it's not needle mover type moves necessarily, but they're going to try to keep up. So another just solid group for the Cincinnati Bengals here.
Looking at the linebackers now, and it's the Chiefs are like the anti-Bills in terms of like the amount of linebackers that they can roll out. They have their starters in Willie Gay and Nick Bolton. They bring Leo Chanel in off the bench, and then for some reason Drew Tranquil decided to sign with the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah,
I don't get that. I don't understand what Drew Tranquil was thinking. I don't know or understand like what his path to the football field is. Maybe they're going to try to use someone like Gay or Bolton as maybe an edge rusher, or Chanel as an edge rusher this year, so that'll get some snaps for Drew Tranquil. But don't really know what was going through Drew Tranquil's head or what Kansas City's got cooking up. But they got some 4 solid linebackers there in those 4. And then you look at the Kansas City Bengals, the depth might not be there so much, but their top 2 guys, and Jermaine Pratt, who they bring back, and Logan Wilson, the Wyoming Cowboy, very good. So both of these teams, both the Bengals and the Chiefs, have solid established linebacking cores.
Yeah, probably better than the Bills linebacking core. I mean, like
Milano's the best of all of them. Don't get me wrong. And this is like, that's the conversation we had last week too. Like Milano's better than all of these guys, but it's Milano and then what for the Bills. And then you just have steadiness for these 2 groups.
Yeah. Nick Bolton, we talked about him a lot in the pre-draft process in 2021. There were a lot of mixed opinions on whether he could survive in the NFL because, a lot of people viewed him as more of that downhill style backer, and he's proven to be pretty solid. He had a good game in the Super Bowl as well, I might add. And then, Leo Chanel, a guy that they drafted in the 3rd round last year. We did a lot of pre-draft discussion on him. And then like they're legitimately 4 deep. The first wave, second wave, and then the Bengals really at the top end. Big fan, obviously, of Jermaine Pratt, an NC State guy, and Logan Wilson. Like that duo, I mean, with Tremaine and Matt not paired up anymore, like Pratt and Wilson like are probably one of the best linebacking duos in the NFL now. Like they're probably easily top 5, maybe higher than that, but they're just super solid. Not deep, like you said, but like, man, when those 2 guys are in, they play so well off of each other. So, man, it's tough.
Taking a look at now.
Yes. Yeah, he did say Kansas City Bengals, but it's okay. We'll let it slide.
Anything past an hour 5, I can't be held accountable to. The secondary for the Chiefs, a lot of there's gonna be a little bit of turnover this year with Thornhill leaving. At safety, they have Justin Reed. They have Brian Cook. I think those are the 2 guys who are going to start. We loved Brian Cook in the pre-draft process last draft season. They added Mike Edwards. They drafted Shamari Connor, so there could be a little bit of competition, but it looks like it's going to be Reed. It looks like it's going to be Cook. And then they have a lot of mix and match ability at their cornerback spot. It looks like it's maybe going to be McDuffie on the outside with either Josh Williams or Jalen Watson, and then L'Jarius Sneed as sort of the nickel corner. But McDuffie can kick inside, and you could have Williams and Watson play the outside. You can move guys around. They have some movable parts there in the secondary. Again, just a really strong secondary and a lot of pieces for a good defensive coordinator and Steve Spagnuolo to play with there.
Good pieces. And like the Chiefs, I mean, they don't really seem to mind if their secondary isn't great. Like it hasn't deterred them, and it hasn't deterred them from winning Super Bowls, obviously. But this is actually a decent looking group on paper. Like McDuffie going into his 2nd year, Brian Cook obviously going into his 2nd year as well. So like there's some promise there for the Chiefs secondary. It looks like I mean, we're going to hope that they're, subpar again
Yeah.
this year, because that's really been where the Bills have attacked them in the games they played. Their secondary has been definitely susceptible to giving up a lot of big plays, but there's some talent there with McDuffie and Cook.
Mhm.
And you just hope that maybe they're still maybe a year or two away from realizing their full potential.
And then you look at the Bengals unit, they get a Woozy back, which is big for them. He got hurt last season. Mike Hilton is a really good nickel defender for them. Then there's some question marks. CB2, is it going to be Cam Taylor-Britt's job again? Or could DJ Turner maybe slide in? They signed Sidney Jones. Could Sidney Jones slide in? That would allow you to maybe move Cam Taylor-Britt to a safety position. So that's something to look for the Bengals as they head into training camp, where their mind's at. But they got a Woozy, they got Taylor-Britt, they got Hilton, they have the rookie Turner, and they got Sidney Jones at corner. And then at safety, they got Nick Scott from the Rams versus Jordan Battle, but I still personally think Taylor-Britt could get in there. And then they have Dax Hill, last year's first-round pick at free safety. So a changing of the guard, at the safety position for the Cincinnati Bengals. They prepared themselves for this by drafting Dax Hill a season ago, but there's still some new names back there. There's some guys who could be moving around before the season starts. But again, just like the Chiefs, some quality names back there.
Quality names, and I think drafting Jordan Battle in the third round really probably created a nice floor for this group now. I mean, think about this. Like, the Bengals that just got gutted, right? They're starting to safeties gone. Bates to Atlanta on that huge deal. And you think about, like, this, that could have happened to the Bills, right? Like, if Jordan Poyer doesn't re-sign and let's say Micah Hyde's injury kept him from playing, like the Bills would have been in a situation like this, but without really any kind of fail safe, right? I mean, like, not a great situation, but the Bengals did invest that first round pick in Dax Hill a year ago, signed Nick Scott, drafting Jordan Battle in the third round this year. I think it was a nice floor for them. Maybe Cam Taylor-Britt mixes in at safety. Maybe he, gets a little run there. I know Aaron Quinn and you both were both kind of like, considering that as a possibility for him at the next level in the pre-draft process last year. So look, I kind of liken this maybe a little bit to like the Chiefs wide receiver room, where there's like a lot of untapped talent here. And it's just going to be a matter of like what ends up sort of transpiring. At least on paper, you would look at this Bengals defense and you'd say you would attack the deep middle, right? And that's kind of where you would think the biggest weakness would be. But these guys could be good, right? And so it just might take them a little time to figure it out.
And there's a lot of potential on both the Chiefs defense and the Bengals defense. And they also have two very good defensive coordinators who we're going to get to when we start talking about the coaching staff in the next segment, in Lou Anarumo and Steve Spagnuolo. So that's going to play a role in this AFC battle for supremacy as well. All right, on to special teams. Obviously, again, just like last week, we're not going to get into the weeds of who are the gunners and like what are like the four phases of special teams. We're looking at kickers and punters and maybe a couple of possible return men. We're not going to go too deep into it. The Chiefs are bringing back pretty much their whole special teams unit. Harrison Butker is their kicker. He had a back injury last year and then just wasn't the same. He missed a kick in the Super Bowl.
He had an ankle injury too last year that he battled through.
So maybe he's healthier this year, because when he's healthy, he's been my fantasy darling every year, except for last year. Last year he caused me a lot of pain. But Tommy Townsend, their punter, their punter, solid punter. And then they got guys like Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Isaiah Pacheco, a bunch of different guys they can throw out in the return unit. The Bengals have Snoop Dogg's biggest fan, Evan McPherson, most notable for watching the Super Bowl halftime show instead of being with his team in the locker room. And then they got Drew Chrisman versus Robbins, Brad Robbins, the punter that they drafted in the 6th round to dictate their punting battle. And then they got guys like Charlie Jones, Trayvon Williams, Chris Evans, Trent Taylor returning kicks as well. So both teams just solid, maybe not spectacular units like the Bills. If Butker's on, they have an elite kicker, and the Bengals have an elite young kicker in McPherson. McPherson versus Tyler Bass, man. It's a battle of young stud kickers.
Young stud kickers, and we'll see if the inconsistencies of Harrison Butker last year were due to injury or if it was really more of maybe him losing his touch a bit. I will say this, and this is sound really bad, but I'm like you. I had Harrison Butker as my fantasy kicker last year, and when I have guys on my fantasy team, I tend to look for news on them on Twitter and things like that. And there's like a pretty decent, I wouldn't say majority, but there's a pretty decent amount of Chiefs fans that I saw that were like ready to move on from Harrison Butker. And I was like, you don't know how good you've had it with Harrison Butker. Like, he's been such a good kicker for you. Like the special teams units for all three of these groups are really solid. Good return options. The punters are all pretty solid. Like there's not a real weakness in like McPherson, Bass, as the up and coming sort of young stud kickers in the AFC as guys like Justin Tucker get older and guys like Harrison Butker get older. It's kind of cool to see those two guys kind of come up and battle each other.
And I know that the Cowboys have dibs on whatever kicker becomes available because their kicking situation's a mess since Bill Mayer got the yips last year in the playoffs. But the kicker of the Philly Stars in the USFL, did you see this? Did you see this story?
Mm-mm.
They won their game 24 to like 21 or something like that. 8 for 8.
Wow.
Like, I think his name is like something Aguilar, like Christian Aguilar, something like that, the kicker for the Philly Stars. And he was booting them from like 55, 56 yards. Like, some of them weren't easy shots. Like, his game-winning kick was like 55 plus yards. So he had himself a day. So if the Chiefs really need a kicker, they can go take one off the Philly Stars roster. It was in Ford Field though, so it was in a dome. But
hey, that's where what do we call him? Dan Carpenter made that kick in Ford Field, right?
And I will say this about Butker too, because he was the best kicker in football. Like, him and Justin Tucker had been the best kickers in football up until his injuries last season. But injuries can derail a kicker quick, man. And just with the snap of a finger, a kicker can go from good to bad. I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm currently rewatching the 2017 Bills. Steven Hauschka looks like a freaking Hall of Famer. I mean, we made the playoffs in 2017 because Steven Hauschka. Like, it was Steven Hauschka, it was Shady McCoy, it was Micah Hyde, it was Jordan Poyer, it was Trey White, it was Jerry Hughes. Like that, it was like 7 dudes who carried us to 9 wins in the playoffs. And Steven Hauschka was our offense. He should have been given offensive MVP that year. He was booting these things from like 55 plus yards. He was keeping us in games. He was absolutely incredible. And then Harry Anderson had to go and end his career with that cheap shot the very next season. We won't talk too much about that. So,
awful.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I never want to root for someone's career to be over, but like, man, if the Chiefs ended up with a question mark at kicker, I would not be too upset by that. All right, enough special teams talk. Let's move on to the coaching staff here as we close things out. The Chiefs have the best coach in football right now. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Andy Reid might be the best offensive mind of all time. I mean, he really is just an enigma in himself right now with the way he calls that offense there in Kansas City. He's got, Eric Bieniemy's gone. Matt Nagy's back as the offensive coordinator. He's got the title. On defense, Steve Spagnuolo's got the reins. I mean, this guy's got the chops. He's a Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator, multiple Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator. What do you have? 2 in New York, and now he's got 2 here in Kansas City. And then you got probably one of the better special teams coordinators in all the league in Dave Taub. So the Chiefs have just an insane coaching staff. You look over at the Bengals, they have 2 young offensive minds in Brian Callahan, who's got head coaching interviews, and Zach Taylor, their head coach, calling the plays there, dialing up new things on offense. And I mean, the Bengals offense got a little stale, and Zach Taylor and Callahan got together. They got in the lab and they sort of reconfigured that offense a little bit to get it jump started last year. And that's the power you have when you have that many offensive minds and you have young offensive minds who are a little bit more flexible at your disposal on your coaching staff. You have Lou Anarumo, who I just have nothing but the utmost admiration for, the way he just changes his fronts and brings different blitzes at you and switches things up and just brings it at you every single week. I wanted the Cardinals to hire him to be their head coach. They went with Jonathan Gannon, who's just an AI robot. And then they have another good special teams coordinator in Darren Simmons there. So 2 quality coaching staffs in Cincinnati and Kansas City. Again, another reason why they're consistently good year after year.
Consistently good year after year. And, potentially why the Bills have been 3rd rung in the playoffs, right? Like, I mean, I get it. It took Reid a long time to get where he is. Zach Taylor's had some early success. I know both of us were not necessarily anti-Zach Taylor, maybe you more so than I,
Oh
but
no,
he
was very much
yeah.
I was very much anti-Zach Taylor. So I'll
But
take my L. I'll take my L there.
he impressed me, right? He's grown into that sort of CEO role, like while still kind of having his finger on that offense. And I feel like Zach Taylor deserves some credit, right? A guy that like got that job mainly because he was off that Sean McVay coaching tree and maybe didn't necessarily have a lot of people think he deserved the job, but he got it. And guess what? He's been to a Super Bowl, been to a couple AFC championship games, and like he deserves some respect for what he's done with that team. And like I think you'd probably have to say that like the Bills might be ranked third when it comes to the coaching staffs when you look at these three teams. And like that's not where you want to be in this pecking order when you're trying to get over on these teams come playoff time. So I'm not saying like Sean McDermott's worse than Zach Taylor. Like that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like in totality, with the question marks on the Bills staff, no defensive coordinator, McDermott taking back over, maybe that's a net positive for them. But Ken Dorsey going into year 2, still some question marks. Like it's tough. It's tough right now if you're the Bills.
This is always something that will, I think for 95% of Bills Mafia, it will always bug them that Sean McDermott is a defensive-minded head coach. Like it will always be something in the back of their minds. It will always be something in the back of their heads because, like, when you look at it, you're like, Zach Taylor and Brian Callahan. Like Zach Taylor's there for the long run. He might lose Brian Callahan, but then Zach Taylor's still there. Sean McDermott, like he lost Brian Dable. You know, if Ken Dorsey gets his head out of his ass and develops and, you know, becomes what we hope he can be as an offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey's gone, right? Like, so you can, Lou Anarumo is getting turned down for job after job after job, despite the fact that he's an awesome coach. He's still there calling your defense. Steve Spagnuolo is getting turned down or not even really invited to the table to interview for any jobs, head coaching jobs. He's always going to be there in the back pocket for the Kansas City Chiefs. You're not going to have that luxury in Buffalo if our offense is humming to have that guy return year after year after year. So that is the downside, really, is the fact that, and that's what's really just going to stick in the back of the minds of most of the Bills Mafia forever and ever, is the fact that if Sean McDermott was an offensive head coach, like Bills Mafia, I think would be much more supportive of him than they are now because of that defensive background, because of the fears that I just sort of laid out. Right or wrong, that's just something that's always going to be in people, myself included, mind. All right. So to finish things off here with the Chiefs and the Bengals, what's your confidence level of how the Bills stack up with these two teams?
Man, I mean, they're all so close, right? Like on any given game, any one of these teams could beat the other. We've seen the Bills beat the Chiefs in the regular season now a handful of times, so they clearly have it in them. On the road, by the way, they've done that. We never obviously got to see what would have happened in that Monday night game last year, but obviously the Bengals had the Bills number in that playoff game a year ago. But those two teams really haven't matched up in sort of, I would call it, normal conditions yet. Bengals have the edge there just in the one game that they really have played. I think the Bills match up better with the Chiefs, or they have matched up better with the Chiefs recently, and we'll see if that continues this year. I just think like playing all those games against the Chiefs in a way has kind of helped the Bills and kind of helped to learn how, you know, they should attack the Chiefs. And maybe that's something they didn't have with the Bengals, right? It was like really the first time they had been playing them. And the, you know, Bengals had kind of done a number on them on the first drive of the game in that Monday nighter before it got canceled, obviously. So, I mean, these teams are all right there with each other. A lot of these games and a lot of these sort of playoff seedings are going to come down to quarterback play. And they all, you know, like I said before, I think they have the three best. These teams have the three best in the league. So it's a toss up. I don't know. Like, I think, like, you know, you brought up the playoffs records and like in the fact that the Bengals have at least made it to the Super Bowl with Joe Burrow. And like, not saying that's a Joe Burrow thing completely, but like the Bills have something still to prove here. They need to make it to a Super Bowl with Josh Allen. So the pressure is on for sure in 2023.
Yeah. at least from a fan perspective, nothing, because we play both these teams in the regular season. We play the Bengals and we play the Chiefs this regular season. Nothing the Bills do in the regular season this year against either of these teams is going to make me feel any better going into the playoffs. The Bills can only make me less confident in their abilities to beat them in the playoffs. Like if we just go out and get like in the regular season, if we go out and crush the Bengals and the Chiefs in the regular season, I will still be on the edge of my seat, nearly peeing myself when we play them in the playoffs. And I will be just anxious and distraught the entire time leading up to that game, during that game, as that game is progressing, no matter what we do to them in the regulars. If we could beat them 75-0 in the regular season, I will still be anxious as heck come postseason.
I think there's truth to that for the Chiefs, but I think like the Bills had to prove that they could beat the Chiefs in the regular season, which they did twice. Yeah. So I do think there is still a little bit of, I do think there's value in the Bills proving they can beat the Bengals in the regular season.
And it comes down at the end of the day too. I think it comes down to, again, I don't want to put too much onus. I don't want to take too much onus off the players. I don't want to be that guy who just blames the coaches. But I do think that we just had this conversation about the coaching staff. I think the biggest difference, what's going to get the Buffalo Bills over the hump and beating these two teams in the playoffs, is going to be coaching. Ken Dorsey, can you take enough pressure off of Stephon Diggs so he's not bracketed in every play and taken away? Can you use Dalton Kincaid correctly? Can you create enough variance in this offense to alleviate the pressure from Diggs to allow him to be an alpha in the playoffs and to keep this offense humming in the playoffs? We've seen this offense hum in the playoffs under Brian Daboll. I know this offense is talented enough to hum. Can they do it? I think a lot of it's going to come down to schematics. It's execution as well, because again, I don't want to make it seem like I'm too one-sided here. And then on defense, again, you're playing Patrick Mahomes, you're playing Joe Burrow. You got to be creative. And Leslie Frazier's gone. There's no more excuses. So what is Sean McDermott going to dial up? What changes is he going to make now that Tremaine Edmonds is gone to get Patrick Mahomes, to get Joe Burrow a little bit more uncomfortable, a little bit more mistake prone, to get those more stops? Like what's he going to do? What's he going to dial up? Because I think the defense is talented enough to execute whatever it is that's necessary. I think we got the dogs in the secondary. I think we got enough dudes on the defensive line. I think we've got quality. Obviously, we have an all-pro and we have quality at linebacker. So I think we got the roster to do it. I think we got the roster to beat these teams. So again, I don't want to be that guy, but it's Ken Dorsey and it's Sean McDermott. Like, what are you going to draw up?
There's nowhere for Sean McDermott to hide now with the defense, right? Especially when it comes to playoff time. And I think that the Bills have the best secondary of all three of these teams. I think that with a healthy Von Miller, the Bills, edge rushing are right there with these teams. Like the interior, maybe the Bills aren't as much of a pass rushing interior defensive line, but like the Bills defense is still, right there with these teams, if not the best of the three when fully healthy. And we saw that with DVOA last year and statistically whatever. So even with injuries, so they do have the roster to do it, right? It's just going to come down to the big moments in the big games. Is Sean McDermott going to be creative enough? Is this team going to execute? Are they going to seize the moment this time around as opposed to folding?
And whether it's 13 seconds or whether it's just the entire Bengals game,
right?
Can't play tight. Like, got to play looser, right? Like, I was kind of inspired by the comment here where Josh Allen's next out. He says, "Stop coaching scared." It almost seems like Sean McDermott, and we've heard some rumblings from this from inside our Cover One group chat. Like, maybe the coaches are like over preparing the players, getting in the players' heads, maybe making them think a little bit too much, and they can't be loose. They're too stiff. They're too rigid. That allows 13 seconds to happen. That allows the Bengals to just march up and down on the field on you, play after play after play, drive after drive after drive. Play a little bit looser, play with your hair on fire, those different things. So seeing that in the postseason is something that we're going to have to see as well. So again, like I just wanted to wrap that up because I'm trying my best not to just blame one or two people. I'm trying to get better at that. And like,
I get it.
My whole narrative before made it seem like it was all in the coaches when it's not. It's as Bruce Nolan would say, there's a plurality pie. Everyone plays a role in the blame. Before we head out of here this evening, Dave, we're not going to go through the whole schedule this offseason like we have in off seasons past. We got some other things that we want to talk about. We talked about the AFC East last week. We talked about the two biggest threats to the Bills outside of the AFC East this week in the Chiefs and the Bengals. So I'm just going to throw it out there to you. Any other team in the AFC East, you can't take any of the AFC East teams. You can't take the Chiefs. You can't take the Bengals. Who is the sleeper threat? What's the one team outside of the East, outside of the Chiefs, outside of the Bengals that are the biggest threat in the AFC this year?
Sleeper threat to me, this is a sleeper, right? I mean, you said sleeper, so it's not going to be not like, I think Jacksonville Jaguars are a sleeper to me. I think that coaching combination of Doug Peterson with Trevor Lawrence, obviously Trevor Lawrence taking that huge step last year, the Jags making the playoffs. Like that team is talented. They have Calvin Ridley in the mix this year to go along with Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne, and another year in the system. They've made a lot of investments on the defense and the draft, guys like Josh Allen, Tyson Campbell, and others in the draft. Like they have a really solid roster, and they're in a division that is up for grabs yet again in 2023. And I think the Jags could be a really, really good team in 2023. They didn't beat the Chiefs obviously last year in the playoffs, but they got good experience in playing in that game, and like good for Trevor Lawrence. And like, I didn't even mention Evan Ingram as well. What a resurgence he had last year. So like they have a really good roster. I think the Jags are a sleeper team. Maybe they're not even a sleeper anymore. Maybe they have the expectations, but I'd say they're a sleeper for sure.
Yeah. We got someone in the comment section here saying the Chargers are stacked. To me, my sleeper team is the Los Angeles Chargers. I think that, again, it's the off season, so I'm just going to throw out like a hot take. Like if I had to pick a team outside of the obvious to win the AFC this year, the 1 seed, if I can't pick the Bills, if I can't pick the Bengals, if I can't pick the Chargers, if I had to pick a shocker, I think I might pick the Los Angeles Chargers to maybe be the best team in the AFC this year. That's how confident I am. And I think a lot of it is the addition of Kellen Moore. Like, I have been very, very critical in the past of Joe Lombardi. Mr. West Coast dumped the ball off, just ridiculously wasting Justin Herbert's talents. How Justin Herbert was still a good quarterback with Joe Lombardi having him dump the ball off on every single play, I have no idea. But now you have Kellen Moore calling plays on an offense with a solid offensive line from left to right. Mike Williams, Quentin Johnson, Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen. They had a Darius Davis, who I think can right away as a rookie sort of replicate what DeAndre Carter did. You got Gerald Everett, you got Donald Parham, you got Jay McKitty, you got Austin Eckler if he decides to show up.
Drafted Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, Isaiah Spiller, Josh Kelly, like so many weapons on that offense, and you have Kellen Moore calling plays. And it takes all of the pressure off of Brandon Staley. And we can make fun of Brandon Staley all we want. He is an exceptional defensive mind. And now he doesn't have to worry about dumbass Joe Lombardi and that offense. He can just focus on the defense. I think he even fired Ronaldo Hill as defensive coordinator, and he's just like the dude now. And he's like taking ownership of that defense. And they've got Khalil Mack, and they've got Bosa, and they've got J.C. Jackson coming back, and they have your guy, Asante Samuel Jr., and they've got a whole bunch of talent on the defense. They added Eric Kendricks, Deion Henley. They added a whole bunch of younger guys to go along with some of the veterans that they have. Like, that's a stacked roster.
Yep.
With
they have been good.
What I think is now a coaching staff that has a balance, because
that's
the
fair.
head coach doesn't have to babysit the offensive coordinator anymore. So I think they can be dangerous. I think they can be really, really dangerous. But Brandon Staley could always fuck it up, because that's something he's been known to do on multiple occasions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably put them fourth right now behind the three we talked about tonight. It'll be interesting. That AFC West will be interesting to see if maybe we were a year early on projecting them to be such a great division. Like, maybe the Chargers will be better this year. Maybe with Jimmy G, the Raiders might be. Who knows? Maybe Sean Payton can get the best out of Russell Wilson. Like, we'll see. Like, it's gonna be. That's just gonna be fun to watch that division, I think.
I'm higher on the Chargers this year than I was last year. I'm higher on the Chiefs this year than I was last year, and I really wasn't even that low on the Chiefs. I just thought, hey, maybe the Chiefs will come back down to earth a little bit, and they end up winning the Super Bowl like they always do. But like, man, I'm not as high on the Broncos as I was last year, despite the fact that they have a better head coach. Oh my gosh, it was so funny how bad Nathaniel Hackett was. And I'm so low on the Raiders right now. I can maybe be sold. I haven't really done like too much of a look at their depth chart, but the defense isn't looking too hot out there unless like Tyree Wilson really steps up as a rookie. So it'll be interesting to see. Again, teams always surprise and play better than they look on paper. And that's something that both those teams are capable of doing. And let's hope they do. Let's hope the Denver Broncos make life a living hell for the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's hope the Las Vegas Raiders make life a living hell for the Kansas City Chiefs. The only problem being is if those teams are good this year, the Bills play the AFC West, so they have to play them too.
Yeah. Denver Broncos Monday Night Football.
Yeah, that was surprising. The Bucks and the Broncos. And who knows? Maybe that's the NFL just saying like, hey, the Buffalo Bills Mafia is crazy. They're going to tune in no matter what. People love Josh Allen. They're going to tune in no matter what. We don't need to waste the Eagles or the Chiefs on you. You can just draw them all in on your own. So maybe that's where the NFL's mind's at. Maybe that's how big of a star Josh Allen is.
People still want to tune in to see cringe Russell Wilson and Sean Payton. Like that's going to be an interesting dynamic, those two. Yeah. So it could be good TV.
All right, Dave, any final thoughts before we head out of here this evening?
I mean, look, especially me, like I talk very positively about the Chiefs and the Bengals. I think rightfully so, right? Mm-hmm. They're them with the Bills are, I think, clearly the three, podium teams in the AFC heading into the season. There's a lot of work to be done for the Bills. Like obviously you got to win your division first, and we're looking ahead here a bit, but they do play these teams in the regular season, and we'll kind of get a benchmark hopefully on what things are looking like. I'm really going to be interested in that Bengals game this year to see how the Bills play in a normal situation against that team. So should be interesting.
Yeah, it should be indeed. Ladies and gentlemen in the comment section, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. These shows in the offseason after the draft, they can go one of two ways. They can be like, what did we just talk about for an hour and a half? Or they can be a real fun conversation. And you guys made it a real fun conversation this evening. I'm going to have a heck of a time timestamping this. And like the OCD in me, like we went on so many tangents tonight, like the OCD in me trying to clip a promo for tonight, trying to timestamp this thing tonight. I'm going to be losing my mind, but it was worth it because we had some fun conversations, some great dialogue back and forth. You guys truly do make this show what it is. We got some good things cooking up over the next couple of weeks. Probably take the end of June, beginning of July off before the Buffalo Bills head back to training camp around the 25th of July. So thank you much for sticking with us, even in the depths of the off season. We will be here every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time here on the Cover One Sports Network. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!